This is Duke University.
What we've been doing is conducting this multi-layered and matched surveys on globalizations and financial crisis. And what I mean by multi-layered and matched survey is that people have done lots of surveys on attitude toward globalization, but they generally ask, they don't coordinate across different actors, right? So they would ask questions to voters, they would ask different questions to legislators, and they would ask different questions to firms and industry organizations. But what we're doing is that we choose critical districts, electoral districts in Japan, and try to match legislators and coordinate legislators and the voters in the same district and the industry organization in the same district and ask the exact same questions about their attitude and behavior toward globalization and financial crisis to see whose interests that the legislators are representing and why. And what's new about this current globalization that we're seeing from the previous waves. And we've completed nationally represented public opinion survey and this experimental public opinion survey that this paper is based on, and then a series of legislator surveys in Japan. The current global financial crisis we face now is called once in 100 years economic crisis, the magnitude of it, the impact of it. And then this gives the concerns for the media and the scholars that maybe the history will repeat itself, that we had the Great Depression that led to this beggar-thy-neighbor protectionist policies adopted by advanced industrialized countries, and this competition and beggar-thy-neighbor policies actually led to World War II. And if you look at Obama administration's Buy American provisions and anti-dumping duties against China, and the stalemate of WTO negotiations and PTA negotiations, we would wonder whether this history will repeat itself, that protectionist forces would take over the government and accelerate into something even more serious than what we have now. And indeed, policymakers seems to be conceding to protectionist demands from organized interest groups. But the big question is, okay, so we understand that the protectionist interests are rising, and the government sometimes responds to them, but how about the public? How about is there rise of anti-globalization sentiment among voters and the public? And what's puzzling about this is that if we really look at the data, the public opinion data on public support for the open economy during the economic crisis, we find that it's actually quite stable, that the bad economic conditions that we face today does not seem to translate into declining support for the free trade. Data shows two things. One is that the citizens are aware of this effect of global recession on the national economy. So there's a massive decrease in the positive evaluation of the national economy. But citizens' evaluation of this national economic situation do not translate into protectionist attitude toward open economy, such as free trade. Despite this massive range that the countries can place themselves in terms of the evaluation of the national economy, that impact on people's assessment about free trade is pretty compact and minimum, right? The substantive impact is also small. And this kind of gives us a puzzle about why this is the case, particularly given all this talk about rising protectionism sentiment under the recession. So what we argue here is that certain support for the open economy might be relatively stable even in the face of global recession due to the expansion and globalization of consumption activities. And paradoxically, we show that those who have high job insecurity are the ones who benefit the most from cheaper goods and services enabled by globalization as consumers. So those who have high job insecurity might oppose globalization as producers, but they actually like the benefits that they reap as consumers. So you see this dramatic shift in their attitude depending on which aspect of their lives, right? A job versus consumption is highlighted and activated by elites. And these two findings and argument actually show in the end that the consumer interest can serve as a vehicle for resisting protectionism in the face of producer demands and the special interest group demands for protectionism. This is a nationally representative survey that asks lots of questions about their social lives and their consumption lives, as well as their attitude toward globalization. So I got to design the globalization part, and the sociologists have asked a bunch of interesting questions about their consumption habit. So we just basically marry them and see what this speculation holds. And this is the results. So we use the two questions about the interaction with foreigners, foreign workers. One is a question about, do you see foreigners often in your community? So see foreigners often. The second question is, do you have foreign acquaintances? And from each, from like 10 countries that they list. And that's two behavioral questions or experience question. And two more questions we analyze is, do you support more foreign workers? And second question is, do you support more foreign residents in your community, right? So this gets at different preference for having more foreign workers versus more foreign residents in your community. And these are the list of variables that we look at. And the red font is anti-migration people. And the black font is pro-migration and significant at 5% level. And what's interesting is that job-related attributes, like those who are employed in a company or business that exports, imports, outsource production, of course they see foreigners more often, and they have foreign acquaintances through job, right? And high-income people also see foreigners more often. But what's interesting about this is the consumption. So frequency of eating out has significant effects on the frequency of seeing foreigners often in your community. And also frequency of eating out has significant effects on whether you have foreign acquaintances. Also frequency of cleaning the houses by yourself, the question says, but also has positive effects on seeing foreigners often. And frequency of cleaning house also have positive effects on having foreign acquaintances. And then these are the control variables, kind of expected. I don't know why married people see foreigners more often. There are two, at least, promising lines of research. And what's been missing in this paper is this idea about the power and elites. I mean, it's all about the priming comes from the neutral sources. There's no party or elites attached to it. And we just don't know the consumers have power over the policy or not yet from the experiment. So the first possible step forward is to see how elites, right, like legislators and parties, activate consumer and producer perspectives. So we could design the experiment in a way that the priming comes from particular political parties. That's one way to go forward, I think. The second ways to push this forward is to think about how different electoral systems translate economic shocks into varying levels of consumer support for open economy. I think Rogaskin and Kaiser have done interesting research about the price and electoral systems, but thinking about recession and how that translates into consumer support and then how electoral system would mediate this process would be another promising line of research. Thank you very much.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.